Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us again for OT Office Hours. I'm Sam Becker. I'm the Director of Marketing here at Insane Cyber. At Insane Cyber, we're focused on combining host and network data analysis for a full picture of OT cybersecurity to detect, secure, and maintain resilience among an evolving threat landscape. Today, we are joined by Toby Walker, one of our site reliability engineers, and John Guptill, our Director of Professional and Managed Services, to talk about ransomware. And they are going to be diving into this topic for us. As a quick housekeeping note before I turn it over to them, if you have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to submit them either via chat or through the Q&A function. We'll have some time at the end to answer any of those questions, or if they make sense, I will ping the presenters for you and ask them any of those questions. So with that, I will turn it over to Toby and John to get started.
Excellent. So thank you for being here. My name is Toby Walker, and I started in the IT industry about 17 years ago doing computer repair. I was doing things from replacing motherboards to removing malware from systems, working in a college town. And then I went from there to working at a managed service provider doing IT help desk work. And then I ended up doing work with web hosting, did that for a number of years, and then moved into software DevOps cycles, supporting DevOps cycles, and then into the security realm where I was working with an IT managed or a security managed services company. And then now I am working doing OT site reliability engineering. So I think it kind of gives me a nice broad, wide scope to kind of see from the ground up. It's been interesting to watch the evolution of ransomware over the years and the way in which it's affected kind of the industry from the bottom up. So yeah, I think I have a kind of a unique lens on that. John, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm John Gupta. I'm the Director of Professional Managed Services here at Insane Cyber. My experience with working with ransomware and malwares, we've got about 11 years in the Air Force, doing various cybersecurity roles, some of those including incident response and malware reverse engineering, and seeing the different results, as well as working at other companies doing threat detection and reverse engineering analysis of major threats. Yeah. All right.
Excellent.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. So yeah, I'll get us started here. Just to talk about what ransomware is. I'm assuming if you're tuning in, you probably already have a bit of an idea, but let's just kind of go over the basics. Ransomware is software that will encrypt your data. It is typically placed onto a system or injected onto a system through some sort of malicious activity, be it through a bad software download or some sort of social engineering to gain access to a system. And then it also, so it will encrypt your data. And then there's also anytime that this happens, especially with modern day malware, there's always a potential threat that the data could be exfiltrated. It could be leaked out of your network. And then it will include, one of the characteristics of ransomware is it'll include literal ransom notes. A lot of times in the case of just like a text file included. So your data will be encrypted and you'll have a text file and it'll tell you for instance, send 0.5 Bitcoin to this Bitcoin address. If you want to get a decryption key to decrypt your files, that's what they will tell you. And then you can, in theory, pay that and get that money from them. At least that's their extortion demand. And it can, like I said, it can also include exfiltration. It can also be a threat of, if you don't pay us, we will release this information to the public. We will post it. And so you have now leaked, in some cases, say customer or sensitive data. So yeah, that's a general idea of ransomware. If we can move to the next slide. So I want to go over just kind of the history of ransomware, of the occurrences, the most popular occurrences that have happened throughout history, because I think it kind of paints the picture of how it's come into being over time. So can we move on? We'll go ahead and start with the AIDS Trojan from 1989. So this was the first widely known example of extortion via encryption. Of course, there are probably plenty of other times that it happened, but this was one of the first larger scales of it happening. and it was distributed literally via floppy disks that were labeled as AIDS education software. So you thought you were going to learn something, put it in, and then at first it worked fine, but then the software essentially had a time bomb on your system, in which after 90 reboots, it would hide all your directories, encrypt the file names on the C drive, and then in order to, what they would show you, since there was no public blockchain ledgers back then, like Bitcoin, that are being used for cryptocurrency. So back then, they would just have a ransom message that would demand a payment of $189 sent to a PO box in Panama. So no cryptocurrency, but you can still have a PO box in Panama to try and do it that way. It used a really rudimentary symmetric encryption. So once people started to dig into it, they found that there was an easily reversed, publicly available that was easily reversed symmetric encryption. So they made a publicly available tool, which people were then able to use to get around the issue. But this was still very, 1989. So it was not something that people were familiar with, this idea of having to, have security on their computer systems, essentially. So let's move on. So the WannaCry was another ransomware. This was in 2017, I believe. I guess I missed it on the slide, my mistake. But yeah, WannaCry was in 2017, and this was a eternal blue vulnerability, came up in SMB version 1 of Windows. This was really interesting because this was essentially the first major case study. I have this as the last bullet point on here, but this was the first major case study of why patching is so essential, because Microsoft had released MS-17010 2 months before this exploit went public the exploit started being used publicly. So if people had actually patched their systems, they wouldn't have been running into this. But of course, up until this point, most modern IT infrastructure was not familiar with these type of threats, or at least they weren't taking them seriously like they should have been. And so it ended up actually locking down the UK's National Health Service. The hospitals were locked down. FedEx and Deutsche Bank were hit, among a bunch of others. And it didn't require user interaction. It actually self-propagated across networks once it made it onto a network. Encrypted files were appended with the WNCRY extension, and they demanded a ransom of around $300 to $600 worth of Bitcoin. And there was essentially a kill switch that was discovered by a researcher, Marcus Hutchins, and that helped with slowing the spread. And like I said, this was a case study in patching. Before this, people were lazy in a lot of cases about patching because it just wasn't on people's radar. But then once you start getting public cases like this, people start taking it seriously. So moving on, we can discuss there's a number of modern ransomware we can discuss. And so there's Ryuk, which targets large enterprises, hospitals, governments. It's often preceded by the TrickBot or Emotet malware for initial access. It uses AES plus RSA, so it's not just a simple symmetric encryption that you can undo like earlier, more rudimentary ransomware was. And nowadays with Ryuk, they'll demand regularly up to 6-7 figures. It's hit publishing companies. It's hit several U.S. cities and school districts. And so that's Ryuk. And there's another one, LockBit, which is a ransomware as a service platform. Which this is kind of a different paradigm that we get into with modern ransomware, where it's not just some group of hackers that are putting together a one-off software to target one company or one enterprise, but rather you actually have platforms that are built where others can come along and pay for the platform or repurpose some source code and have without really having that much background, they can actually do ransomware. And so LockBit's fully automated, has fast file encryption, spreads laterally like Ryuk did, like WannaCry did. And it has a steal now encrypt later capability, which means it can exfiltrate up to wherever they have servers. has its own software, ransomware as a service branding. The ransom notes and leak sites have a branding that matches the LockBit. The Royal Mail in UK got hit by this. Continental in Germany got hit by LockBit. And yeah, so one interesting thing with LockBit is it starts to show this ransomware enterprise, because you actually have affiliates that get a cut of the ransom payments if someone else uses their ransomware as a service platform to extract a ransom from somebody. Another one is REvil. This one, some notable targets were JBS Foods, which is the world's largest meat processor. Kaseya VSA is a managed service provider tool that is used by, say, a lot of IT managed service providers. So let's say you're a small business and you can't afford to hire an IT company. You decide to go with the IT managed service provider route. You pay maybe a local small IT managed service company to do remote management of your systems. Well, Kaseya VSA is something that they would maybe use for that, to allow them to get access to your system. So if you have an issue, you can call them, they can fix your PC, they can do adjustments to your domain or whatever. Well, Kaseya VSA itself got hit with this exploit, and so all these small businesses that had Kaseya on their systems would then also be exploited by the REvil ransomware. And so this one also had the issue of double ransom, where they would encrypt and leak your stolen data with the threat of publishing it. And their infrastructure did get disrupted by law enforcement. I apologize for the sound there. In 2021, and they did briefly resurface under different names, but it's basically disappeared since then. But yeah, one thing to note also with all of these is I'm talking about specific instances in which we know about, and you don't always know about all of the ransomware exploits that are occurring, because if possible, a company will try it. Companies have the ability to keep these things under wraps. It's not a good look for them to be publishing that they got hit by ransom, but things become different when you get well, let's go ahead and move on. And then also just an update on this came up today, actually, so I thought I'd throw this in here. They have actually now they are saying that the current attack that's occurring in St. Paul, if you haven't been following it, the city has essentially had to be shut down because of a cyber attack. Well, they've now come out and said that it's the Interlock ransomware gang that's responsible for a cyber attack. And I believe they're checking now to see if there's been any sort of exfiltration, but we'll wait for more information to come out on this. But yeah, this is currently affecting an entire major U.S. city. Yeah. So moving on. Let's quickly discuss how to avoid a ransomware attack. Really, it comes down to using smart, thorough, and systemic policies and I mean that on a system level and on a corporate level. You want to have system level policies that are going to prevent any sort of execution. You want to have least privilege access and app control, and that goes for all of your internal access and file level access, but also app control. So that just means, for instance, not giving your users administrator access to, say, your AWS console or something like that, or your AWS management, if they're not someone that needs to have that level of access. Not giving someone access to an application that they maybe need to use one time, or if they only need limited access to that application, or if they don't not even need full access to that application, then don't give it to them, because you're opening up essentially attack vectors potentially. And then you want to have, on, like, say, Windows systems, especially any end user systems, really all systems, you want to have, if possible, you want to have EDR. You want to have endpoint detection and response that can prevent execution of these things, because you can train people, and you should always be training all of your employees on phishing and cyber attacks, social engineering. But no matter how much you train people, there is that social element that comes up. And there's actually, it's been shown that no matter how much you train certain people, they will still be prone to certain social engineering attacks. So it's important to have more than just trained employees, but to also have system level policies, endpoint detection response, make sure that there's no, blind spot in your security. So moving on, or actually, John, did you have anything, any other thoughts on that by any chance?
No, yeah, it's just really making sure that you've got the backups and everything there and the security in place, making sure that you're not going to get attacked first by the ransomware. Just like make sure that you're secure and not exposing yourself through these attacks. Even though these attacks may come through other means, like through email or other things, like you just got to make sure you're training your personnel. So don't click the link and things like
Right.
that.
Cool. Next, we'll talk about how to respond to a ransomware attack. So I don't have this listed on the slide, but first of all, you should probably contact the FBI. Go online, go search, do a search for FBI ransomware, find the form on fbi.gov, make sure it's from the fbi.gov domain, and file your report there. But then locally, what you can do, you want to do a forensic investigation. So you want to check your logs for your applications, any possible attack vector. You want to find where this exploit came from, how this bad actor got access to your network. So that means checking your auth users for your Active Directory, checking your auth users for LDAP, check your network activity. If you have like a SIM, you want to be checking for the telemetry for any exploited systems, and check your firewall logs. Check for firewall alerts. You may find a good hint in your firewall alerts, which can tell you which system you need to check. You need to go digging through some database tables, looking for auth users, looking for what was the problematic software or the problematic system where this all came from in the first place. And so you're going to need to do system and device audits. And that means when you need to find the infected machines and isolate them. We'll get back to that when we get to the essentially before or moving. Well, so I'll just cover it right now. If you find an infected machine, you want to isolate it right away, and that means taking out all of the command and control traffic that could possibly have, bringing it offline, and making sure that you probably really just should rebuild the system. So check those things, do your forensic investigation, find the source, find the full scope of what's occurred. And then next you need to assess your encryption situation. Did all of your data get encrypted? How much of your data got encrypted? Which systems? Do you have backups of that data that got encrypted? Now, you're also going to have to check, did your backups get encrypted? Because a lot of these ransomware applications have the ability to check they check for all of the common backup paths. They actually, I think some of them will check for which backup software you're using and then check for that backup software's specific backup paths. And the whole goal with this is to make sure that you don't have redundancy of your data. So you can't just clear your systems out and restore from backup and not pay them out. They want to get paid. So they literally will target the same backup of whatever they're encrypting so that you can't just restore from that backup. So you need to check your backups. You need to do, check your system state backups. Now, this is why one thing we'll get to in a little bit is if you have offline backups, you can restore from those in pretty much every case, as long as those were made before the exploit happened, because those are offline. So the ransomware has no ability to encrypt that data. Now, let's say you don't have backups. Technically, you can work with your cybersecurity insurance It's possible that you can pay out the ransomware, the person that's trying to exploit you with ransomware, and they will give you your key potentially, and you will potentially be able to decrypt your data. But if you do that, you're essentially paying someone that's deploying ransomware, someone that targeted your system and has no reason not to target your system again to try and get the exact same payout all over again. So you're essentially building up the world of ransomware. You're strengthening the adversaries. So that's why I would say, work with the FBI. Take these things into consideration when you're working with your cybersecurity insurance. But yeah, that is theoretically an option that you have. And that's why I'd also say, you don't always know all the places where this is occurring, because these corporations have incentive to keep, or companies have incentive to keep these things as much under wraps as they can, because it doesn't look good to be a victim of ransomware. So moving on, we'll talk about how to mitigate threats. I already mentioned, you want to isolate the systems, block command and control. Let's actually, can we move to the next slide? I'm sorry. So once outside of what you can do after you've dealt with ransomware, we talk about how this is kind of in line with what we already talked about in how to avoid a ransomware attack. Some of this is kind of redundant with that, but there's more aside from just avoiding the attack outright. Having smart system design with proper network segmentation, doing offline backups like was mentioned, having a proper intrusion detection system, having a proper SIM so you can actually look at your data and do a proper analysis and watch for any intruders, doing proper threat assessments. These things will help to keep the surface area of your network internally safer from. And we noticed when we talked about WannaCry and REvil, I believe, multiple ransomware softwares move laterally across networks. That's just the best way for the ransomware to propagate itself. So having proper network segmentation, doing things like we were talking about earlier with proper IT security measures, with having least privilege access and app control across your systems always, and every time that you sensibly can. You want to do that because it will mitigate surface area, meaning you can't have, you could avoid potentially having someone that's a systems administrator's account get hacked, and then now because they have too much access, your accounting software and your file server of your accounting application has also been encrypted and ransomed. If you're able to segregate those accounts, keep the groups from being able to access those resources, then you'll have a more isolated instance. And others just really, they seem like really common sense things, but it's really important to have proper employee security training, like we already discussed. Offboarding processes are something that are really important, making sure that when a user leaves your company, that you don't just disable their main account, but also just if there are any other ad hoc accounts out there where the user is logging in with a local account to, say a password manager, or say, an email service, or maybe a client portal that they had ad hoc access to. Well, you need to make sure that all of those things get offboarded properly, that those accounts get deactivated, deleted, and that there's no longer access. And one of the best ways to do that, if you can't script it, you should always script these things when you can, so that you can make sure that each step gets hit, and then you should have, of course, a flag if there's an error. But if you can't script it, then the next best thing is having a proper checklist, because if you're doing something over and over again, there's always a possibility that you could forget something. And this also on top of this, you want to have proper policies. This means, telling users how they should be using their equipment, where they should be keeping data, Should they be having their home drives encrypted? Which really you should be doing that in an automated fashion anyways, but just depending on your situation, you want to make sure that you have proper policies, procedures. I would call it like common sense IT security from top to bottom. Do you have any other thoughts on that by any chance, John? Sorry to put you on the spot.
No, it really is trying to minimize the surface area here and making sure you have the proper policies in place. Um, and yeah, having those things to be able to understand and prevent the enemy or whoever's trying to get into your network from jumping different places, like have that proper network segmentation, like going into different, especially in OT environments, a lot of them are going to be flat networks, and you've got to make sure you have that network segmentation, like keep your IT network separated from your OT network, keep your, even within the OT network, keeping only those devices that want to talk or that need to talk to each other, having them talk to each other. And again, having monitoring solutions and being able to track when those happen so that you can understand when you are getting hit, that you understand um, the timeline, and you can you're not sitting on data or sitting on a compromise for more than a few weeks, to be honest, like where um, someone may not report this early and you may have to um, get in there sooner than you need to.
Right. So I guess I went a little fast there, but
No,
oh, go ahead.
no worries. I was going to say we can open it up to questions. I've got a few that I can turn over to you guys now. Um, so the first one I kind of want to ask is, since we are OT focused, and I think a lot of the people that join us are OT focused, I feel like most people think that ransomware is kind of an IT thing. I think if we look at the recent St. Paul scenario, that was more on the IT side of things. It was users' passwords, things like that. Do you think that there is are we seeing more trends to OT focused ransomware attacks? And is the response different in that case, or is it kind of more collateral damage to an IT ransomware um, focused attack?
I would say um, those OT spaces are being targeted more, in that they the attackers know that they can probably get more out of that company than they could with going just a general IT network, because um, a lot when it's OT, you're talking about your product, what you're trying to
Mhm.
sell. It's not just like your corporate network, but instead it's the actual product. And with a lot of these attacks with ransomware, a lot of they do hit the IT network, and the question usually is like, did this touch the OT side of the network? And so when you go and do these forensics checks, you may need to go in and see, did it actually touch the OT network? Do we need to bring down the OT resources if only the IT side? And that might be the case where they do end up deciding to bring down the OT side, mainly because there might be certain controls, certain billing, or certain other things that happen on the IT side that without having visibility into that, they do need to bring down the OT side. But those are decisions that um, are going to be need to be made by the plant owners, and um, and I guess to answer the original question, that yes, OT is being targeted, especially with this.
Yeah, and I would
Okay.
add on to that, just looking at history, in 1989, when the AIDS Trojan virus came around, people had no reason to think that that would be a thing, and then
Hmm.
it was. Or in 2017, when WannaCry happened, people weren't patching because in that paradigm, they didn't think they needed to, because there hadn't been something like that before. But these are adversaries that are actively looking for new ways to exploit you, exploit your network, exploit your system. So if you have critical OT infrastructure, I mean, that would be one of the highest ransoms you could possibly achieve. So to consider anything else in your head, you're not looking realistically at the threat landscape.
And we're not advocating on this call for attackers who are like, oh, go
Right,
to
of course
OT.
not. I'm
Like
just
it's
I'm
a
just putting
easy
myself
spot.
logically in that position. Right, right. I'm not like Morally, legally, I'm in a totally different place, but
So going into that a little bit more specifically on the OT side, since there is a lot more legacy, IT systems get patched a lot more frequently. There's a lot more kind of modernness on it, right? OT systems can typically be older and that they have that kind of legacy challenge to them. So, what are kind of some of the steps that organizations can take to make sure that they're protecting those? And then also, to that point of having those offline logs and backing things up with those legacy challenges in place, what are some things that people can do to kind of balance that challenge of old tech with, today's challenges?
I mean, this goes back to the thing that Toby was mentioning with the WannaCry attack. It was a an attack that was against a vulnerability that was patched months before. And that's the one thing I can say is just keep your stuff updated inside your system, reduce that surface area, as well as making sure that your network segmented so that they can't get to those spots as well.
and keep up on your threat assessments so that you know what is out there. And keep that on the proper teams' radars, and have proper procedures in place to deal with those things in a timely fashion.
Okay. Are there specific tools or resources that companies can put into place to check whether something is kind of coming into place for like if they're, preparing for a ransomware attack or somebody's gearing up to kind of put them in that scenario? Is that just a typical kind of like threat hunting to Toby's point, or is there something else that's there?
Yeah, I would say you want to just be doing standard, standard monitoring of your surface, all your surface areas. You want to, that's why I would say the importance of having a SIM, having proper live analysis of your network, so you can see where your threats are coming from.
And you can also perform threat assessments on your network to make sure that folks are looking at where those holes are and they can be patched. And then just in general, just like keeping active on different feeds that are out there that can tell you about what threats are occurring. Like like Toby brought up, even just this today with the announcement of like what actually was going on in St. Paul and just being aware, keeping your thumb on the pulse. So yeah.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit, well, we talked a lot about WannaCry and some of the previous things. And it sounds like sometimes there's lessons learned from it, but then we keep getting new attacks and things. So, what do you think some of the most recent lessons learned are that we can take into play? We talked about WannaCry, obviously. There's some that are, currently going on. What are some of the foundational kind of lessons learned that we can continue taking into the future? I'm sure we'll get more out of this St. Paul incident as well, but what do you think are some of the things that have changed, like the foundation of how we handle ransomware attacks?
I would say just in general on a security level, that it's easy to get kind of tunnel vision on certain aspects of security and forget about other aspects of security. And like I you kind of need to have top to bottom thoroughness. And I would just point out, your security software itself, if you download a patch and that patch isn't properly checksummed, or if your security provider was hacked in some way, then you can have a whole bunch of corporations and entities around the world that get exploited in one night. Uh, referring to other, back to things that have happened over the last few years. So it's just like just keeping a very diligent mindset and not overlooking the little things, and not relying on a specific security protocol as much as actually understanding the security fundamentals and making sure that those are properly implemented from top to bottom.
Hmm. No, I completely agree with Toby's sentiment.
You kind of have to be a jerk about it sometimes, right? Like you have to be the guy that makes things more inconvenient for people. But that's just that's the way it has to be.
Yeah. If you were to put on, you're looking into the crystal ball and you're like looking into the future, what do you think kind of the next phase, not that I want you guys to become scary hackers, but what do you think people can do now to kind of like if you were to think like a hacker or think like a malicious group, what do you think the next phase of that would look like? And what could companies today do to kind of harden themselves against something that's coming next, like other trends that we're seeing in other areas? I know, John, that you've thought about this before, so you get to put your evil genius hat on.
Um, yeah, I mean it's that control logic level attacks where they're getting down into the controllers, changing different things. Um, but I mean to go against that is just making sure that the path to that is not easy and it's difficult to get down to that level. Um, and then also where you've got threats that are trying to be persistent, they will wait on your network for months to years at a time before they even make any moves. And so going against that is just checking to make sure that again, like checksums and things are okay on your network, checking host logs, checking network logs, seeing if anybody's like gone into these things unnecessarily, making sure that you've got updated passwords on all your things so that like and change them frequently so that like if someone has exfiltrated your creds, they're not being able to use that to be able to traverse your network. You can just yeah, stay secure at that level.
And yeah, I would add on just one thing that I find frightening is just the way in which that these adversaries are sharing tooling, in the way that someone can build a tool and then someone else can take that and they don't have to reinvent that wheel now and they can build upon that. And so it's not even just that it's making it more accessible for people that are not as well versed in IT security, but it also makes it more accessible or makes it easier for the people that are well versed or that maybe are a bit more clever and that they can take that now, whatever tooling has been built, and they can use that to get themselves 90% of where they need to go. And then now they're in a position where they can, much more quickly start to, and it gives them a wider attack area as well. So you can you can fish an entire sea at once. And then if you happen to find somewhere where you've landed an exploit, now you're there
Hmm.
and you have the ability to now decide, how do I exploit now that I'm already on this network or I've already found this backdoor that this company or team missed. Um, so that to me is what I think is something that everyone needs to be aware of and have on their radar, is that as new exploits are discovered, it's going to become easier and faster for these adversaries to iterate on exploits and to come up with ways to utilize them. So you should never get too comfortable, and yeah, just don't get too comfortable, unfortunately.
Yeah. So another question is, we talk a lot internally about doing tabletop exercises and preparedness. So, as companies want to, harden against any attacks or anything, should they have just like a library of tabletop exercises, like this is a ransomware tabletop exercise, like this is, a living off the land like tabletop exercise, and then in that point as well, are there people that should be involved in a ransomware tabletop exercise that may be different than pulling in, other, um, Toby mentioned, for instance, like not every ransomware attack goes announced. And so, what's the um how can companies prepare for that via like a tabletop exercise so that they can be most prepared in the event that something happens?
Yes, absolutely. Like as much as you can, you should do every type. I mean, it's really just going to depend on your team and your team size, how much, availability your team has. But this is exactly how you're going to find all these little things. When I'm talking about top to bottom security, one of the best ways to check all those things is to sit down with your team and do one of these exercises, and then actually put yourself in that situation, and then go from there. And then you're going to discover all these little places in your network where someone could get through laterally and they shouldn't be able to, or a random like, oh, well, we do have a vulnerability here, even though we thought it was isolated in this particular circumstance. No, that's no longer isolated. So we need to actually make sure that that vulnerability is properly addressed. This sort of a thing is, I think very important, and it just helps you to make sure you don't have those blind spots.
Yeah, and I agree with tabletops. They are there to help you run through how you're going to respond and testing your folks that you have on your teams about what they would do through different scenarios and create those thought exercises of like, if this happens, who's responsible for what? What do you do when this happens? And so it's not just like you getting a report from a threat assessment, but no kidding, like walking through what has actually happened and how are you going to react as a company to this action? And that's very important to run through those cycles so when it does happen that you're ready.
Great. Well, that is all the questions that we have, but I'll turn it over to you guys if there's any last parting thoughts that you want to share, any last nuggets of knowledge that you want to share with the group here.
I would just reiterate that things are always changing out there,
Mhm.
and you should never take any of your security and your infrastructure for granted. Um, a tabletop exercise is a great idea uh, to collect information on that. A threat assessment is a great idea to collect information on that. Um, and just specifically on the topic of ransomware, keep some offline backups, because if it's depending on your situation, offline backups are if air gapped offline backups are one of the only actual truly secure ways to keep your data secure in a sense. Uh, Maybe that's a bit of a stretch for a statement, but it's a very good idea to keep some offline backups when you can. And yeah, any other thoughts, John?
Yeah, ransomware's out there. It's going to attack people. They're going to target more and more obscure things. Like just because you're um, a small municipality or a large company, they're going to target whoever they can leverage and just take those precautions by either um, looking through your security processes through like tabletops or even doing vulnerability assessments, or even just making sure that your networks are properly segmented, you're keeping everything up to date, and that you're defending yourselves from when they can happen, and that you have those plans in place when you do get hit, that you can understand what proper procedure is, and you're running through those actions so you can mitigate and make sure it doesn't spread and it's not going to affect your corporate or your organization as much. And that's all I have.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, guys. This was really great. And thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. Next month, we will have Mike Holcomb joining us with our CEO and founder, Dan Gunner. So make sure you register for that. The link is in the chat. It will also be on our website and on our LinkedIn. So we will hopefully see you guys all next month. Thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.